I am Marianne Naples. I am publisher of Publishers Marketplace, and maybe needless to say, I'm thrilled to be here with the incredible authors and editors to share the news of their upcoming books. And I think the buzz is really real because these are such great books, and it's going to be a great conversations. But before we turn to the books and conversations, I want to share a few words about our program. First, please know that you can download our sampler, which I'm holding on my e-reader, which includes excerpts from, I believe, 38 upcoming BuzzBooks official titles, both fiction and nonfiction. You really want to do this to get a view of these notable titles that are upcoming. And just for a little flavor, I happen to receive every single review that the edition gets on NetGalley, so by email. And so I can see the evidence piling in literally every day from booksellers, librarians, media, and reviewers, and their excitement in discovering books that were not previously on their radar or that they didn't know would interest them, including specific callouts for each book that is on this panel. So that was really fantastic to see. We are going to post the BuzzBooks download link in the chat if it's not already there. And so please go ahead and do that. Second, we are now using the hashtag BuzzBooksOfficial, so please share the buzz. And third, please stay until the end, mainly because you will not want to miss any of these conversations, but also because you will have a chance to win a set of advanced reader copies, some physical, some digital, of each of these panel titles. With that, let's get to our panelists. We're going to be starting with The Last Extinction, The Real Science Behind the Death of the Dinosaurs by Gerta Keller, PhD, in conversation with Keith Wallman. Before I do her bio, I just want to say Dr. Keller's story is riveting. The dinosaur wars may not be what you think, and I certainly got a new perspective on this reading this book, and I'm never going to forget the lesson of some unhatched eggs. So Dr. Gerta Keller is a professor of paleontology and geology in the Department of Geosciences at Princeton University. She has placed over 260 scientific publications in international journals and is considered a leading authority on, get this, catastrophes, mass extinctions, and the biotic and environmental effects of impacts and volcanism. She has co-authored 5 academic books and is a frequent lecturer around the world. In recent years, her work has received increased recognition and continues to make waves in the mainstream media, most notably in a widely circulated profile in The Atlantic, a scripted feature film adaptation of her stories in development, and I think you'll see why. And Keith Wallman is the editor-in-chief of Diversion Books.
Well, thank you so much, Marianne. Hello, Gerta. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great.
Much easier than walking into Princeton.
Let's start off with something that Marianne just referenced, a stunning moment, an early conflict in what's called the dinosaur wars that you write about in the book. You walk onto a stage at a major scientific conference. It's 1988. You're revealing your theory and your findings that support it. And you're met with open mockery and disdain by the audience. What did you say that provoked such an explosive reaction, and what was going through your mind at the time?
There were a lot of things going through my mind at that time. And the best one was that it was all wrong, what they were saying. And so what I really wanted to do is go to this meeting, which was the first time I had gone to what we call basically an impact meeting. And it was at Snowbird, Utah. And this was only for, I suppose, really for what we call impactors.
Right.
Those who only believe that an impact caused the extinctions.
Asteroid impact caused the extinction.
Exactly. And so I was actually traveling with a secret. And The secret was that I had returned to working with essentially the dinosaurs, because I had stopped doing it for 5 years because I felt that there was too much hatred going on with the impact world. And so I decided I would do other things, other science for 5 years. And then it would all be over and I could continue my own stuff. Well, it didn't work. It's still going on. But I went to Snowbird, I had done the work, and I found out that they were all wrong. They didn't have a clue what they were doing.
Your
And-
claim you made at the conference, Gerta, was something that completely opposed the asteroid impact theory, right?
Absolutely.
And
Opposed.
bold claim, and you were shouted down at the conference and confronted by
Yes.
this asteroid impact scientist. What was the real story behind the fifth mass extinction that you were trying to tell?
The story was quite simple. That you have the fifth mass extinction, and it was actually Indian volcanism all along. But the impactors would not consider that valid, because whatever they came up with, it had to be an impact and nothing else. And so the other guy was the only paleontologist that actually ever worked really in this impact war, which is, of course, I'm using words rather liberally here, but I called it the impact war by the time I came to Snowbird. And it turned out to be truly that. I did something rather stupid. And that was, I wanted to talk with Jan Smith, who is special for a paleontologist, basically. But he switched to the impactors early on because he became basically the Alvarez's boy to do everything.
Luis Alvarez, correct?
Luis Alvarez,
Who
yes.
had connections going all the way back to the development of the atomic bomb, and then somehow becomes the leading proponent of the theory that an asteroid impact caused the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions I have for you, Gerda, is in these dinosaur wars, the wars between the science that you proposed and studied and had evidence for, and the impact science, what was at stake? Why did it become such a nasty feud? What are the stakes in this battle over science? Is it funding? Was it money?
There was plenty of money from NASA.
Okay.
They had huge amounts and they funded everything. But that was all those things who worked on the impact stuff. The other ones were bringing in funds in order to get more money. And that was because at the beginning, when Luis Alvarez opened up that this was the impact, basically, he basically made up stories. And he did it along with NASA, of course. And I got a lot about that because at some point when I had stopped working with any paleontology as far as the Alvarez were concerned, I had switched to a story that was about, yes, impacts, but a different one.
That's right.
It was an impact from, how am I going to say that? There were impact glass varials that I had studied early on, and they had come from mostly from anywhere in the US, but also from India and every other places.
Right.
And it was a time when I was happy about it, and I had discovered that, in fact, again, what they had said was wrong, because I was able to study the Alvarez as well as the other impactors. I still call them impactors, by the way.
Yeah.
And it was good. And I had found out that actually at that time you had
Massive volcanic eruptions.
that is yes.
The greenhouse gases, the climate change, correct?
Which ones?
The climate change. It was.
Oh, the climate change was much later. The climate change comes in when much later, with India, for instance, very much so. And it still goes on there.
And that's an part, right, Dr. Keller? That if you want readers to take something away from this book and to come away with something, would it be that the kind of extinction that actually occurred, the cause of this the fifth extinction, is something that may be happening now, but with a different source, and that we have to be cognizant of that?
Yes, that's for certain. Right now, though, with what is happening now with climate change is, I would say, even dangerous. What's going to happen?
Even more dangerous. I
More,
think it's a huge takeaway from the book, Gerta. It's essential. And what you've done is essential work, and it informs what we're living through today.
I'll take.
Yes. I apologize for jumping in because I think having read your book, I could listen. I want to hear more and more, but our time is up. But I thank you both for coming. And I also just want to say, reading your book, I was amazed at how aggressive these conferences are. It's just amazing that you blazed your way through them. And that was what I was also saying about the eggs, the unhatched eggs, because the end of your book is quite chilling. And I forgot to hold it up at the beginning, but the last extinction is certainly what we hope that was. Now we are going to turn to, let me hold it up here, Heart of a Stranger, an Unlikely Rabbi's Story of Faith, Identity, and Belonging, by Rabbi Angela Buchdahl in conversation with Pamela Dorman. This book I found so beautiful, so wise, so striking, with so many lessons to contemplate and put into practice. And honestly, I think I cried twice. Rabbi Angela Warnick Buchdahl serves as the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue in New York City, the first woman to lead this flagship congregation in its 185-year history. Under her leadership, Central Synagogue has grown to become one of the largest synagogues in the world, including congregants attending via live stream in more than 100 countries. Born in Korea to a Jewish American father and a Korean Buddhist mother, she's the first Asian American to be ordained as a rabbi in North America. Rabbi Buchdahl was invited by President Barack Obama in 2014 and President Joe Biden in 2023 to share blessings for the White House Hanukkah party, and has been featured in dozens of news outlets. And Pamela Dorman is Senior Vice President and Publisher of Pamela Dorman Books Viking. So I'll add, they are both here on the screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Angela. Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Pam.
It's great to be here. As Marianne just said, you are the daughter of a Korean Buddhist mother and an American Jewish father. And even as a child, you identified yourself as Jewish, and soon you wanted to become a rabbi, even when you were young. How did you have both the faith and the chutzpah to aspire to becoming the first Korean American rabbi and a woman to boot?
So thank you for that first question. I just want to start by just saying thank you to all of you for being here. And I'm just deeply honored to be part of this conversation with people who promote books and love books and share them out in the world. So as a rabbi, I'm big at looking for signs. And I will say that I was born in 1972 in Seoul, South Korea. But a month before I was born, the first woman was ordained as a rabbi in the world. So I would never know that halfway around the world, an event would have happened just a month before I was born that would change the trajectory of my life. But this is the way I often see the divine hand in many things. So I immigrated to America when I was only 5 years old, and my parents made the choice that I would be raised in the Jewish community. My father's family, they all lived in Tacoma. They were all Jewish. And I think my mother, my Korean immigrant mother, I think felt like being Jewish would help me be more American. We could talk about the irony of that. But anyway, I was, as a newly immigrated Korean girl, about a few months from kindergarten, I barely spoke any English. And I came into my kindergarten class, and all the children looked at me with my seaweed lunches and everything else and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Korea," because that's how I identified myself. And then I remember going to Korea to visit my family and relatives when I was only 7 years old, and we went back for our first trip. And I saw all these Korean children and played with them, and they said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm Korean." And they said, "No, you're not." And I remember the first time that I went to my mother weeping and saying, "I don't have a home." And my mother said, "Home is wherever your people are. You can make any place your home." And this was, in some ways, that encapsulates like my path to the rabbinate is a search for home. I grew up in my father's synagogue. I was already the fourth generation in my temple in Tacoma. So I had a sense of rootedness, but we were, of course, the only Korean faces in that synagogue.
Right.
And we were deeply welcomed, and yet I always felt like I was a little bit outside. When I ventured outside the safety of my Tacoma, Washington, tiny Jewish community, that's when I really encountered people who said, "Well, you do understand that the legal definition of being Jewish is traced through your mother, and you've got a Buddhist Korean mother, so you're not actually technically Jewish." And so there were many ways in which I felt like a stranger. And
Right.
but here's the thing, I found myself at home in Jewish texts and in Jewish stories and in Jewish prayer I was a little bit obsessed with God as a little kid, and I would make up songs and sing songs to God on the swing set. I started leading my sister in prayers before bedtime, when I was about 8 years old. So there was something that was deeply resonant for me. And one of the things that I think is super powerful, and maybe why I really stayed in it and became a rabbi, is I will tell you the origin story of the Jewish people for a moment. In the Bible, Abraham and Sarah, when they were called to start Judaism, God says to Abraham and Sarah, "You have to leave your birthplace, your home, your father's house. You have to go to a land that you do not know, and you will be a blessing." And so Abraham and Sarah pick up and leave everything they know behind, and they go and cross over the river Euphrates, and they go into a land where they are total strangers. And that word crossing over in Hebrew is where the word Iri, Hebrew, literally comes from, Ya'avor. So literally to be a Hebrew is to be a boundary crosser. And what I recognized is that Abraham's, like the essence and existential state of being Jewish is to actually know what it's like to have the heart of a stranger, not so that you feel alone or embittered, which is not what Abraham and Sarah did, but as a source of empathy and creativity and resilience, which comes from what it feels like to know what it's like to feel that way. So I saw in that origin story my own story. I also left my birthplace and home. I felt like a stranger, and I realized that was the most Jewish thing about me. Share one last piece. I now, not in my wildest dreams did I think I could become the rabbi of a large congregation in New York, let alone now maybe one of the largest congregations in the world. How does an immigrant Korean with a Buddhist mom do that? Um, I think I honestly realized that um, my heart of a stranger, knowing what it felt like to be on the outside, I thought that that was a unique experience, that I was kind of the weird unicorn in my Jewish
Right.
community. But when you dig just a little bit beneath the surface in anyone's story, what I realized is that everyone had their own multiple identities they were navigating. Everyone felt like for one reason or another, they were outside or a stranger. And by the way, this is not just a Jewish experience. This is a human
Yes.
experience. And that is really what I'm understanding. So knowing what it felt like to have the heart of a stranger became in some ways my superpower for connecting. And that honestly is how I've come to end up leading this community now, the most unlikely rabbi to lead a large New York congregation. And I think that that is the story that I truly want us to tap into at a time when people feel lonely and isolated and polarized, and um, at a time when almost every minority group in America and perhaps even white men in America feel like they're the stranger. Maybe actually
Yes.
this is the connecting point for us as human beings, not the thing that divides us.
I think you're right. And I think the fact that that was your original identity and is still your identity and is also your strength is something that certainly comes through in this book. I just wanted to talk for a minute about the structure of this book, which we worked on for quite a long time. Angela Duckworth, the author of Grit, said about the book, come for the story, stay for the sermons. And I know your goal when you started this book was to write a book about Jewish spirituality, but it really became a memoir with a kind of twist because each chapter ends with a kind of mini sermon. How did you come up with that structure and why? I mean, it had a huge resonance for me, and I know it has for everyone who's read the book.
Thank you. So I just want to start by saying that stories and books have always been sacred in my family. I'll just say that my Korean grandmother ran a bookstore in her
That's
small
right.
village of Hyungpung. My mother started working in that bookstore when she was 10, and she became a voracious reader, reading everything. And it was books that helped my mom imagine a future outside or a bigger world outside of her tiny town of Hyungpung. She was the first to go to college in her family. I think it's how she could envision marrying my American father. And so books were big. And I remember long, lazy summers when I was a child and we couldn't afford to go to summer camps or anything like that. And my mother was a teacher. So she would make me write books in the summer and she would pay me 10 cents a page. Um, even then, the ID and libraries, I just want to say, because I know there's some librarians probably in this crowd as well. Libraries were my second home. Literally, my mom, who was a teacher, there would be times when we didn't have any childcare, and that was back in the latchkey generation when, kids kind of took care of themselves. But my mother would say, go to the library with your sister, sit in the children's room and read some books. I'll pick you up at 5 o'clock. And so I have such a reverence for books, libraries, bookstores, and storytelling. But I never, even with the practice my mother made me have of writing books as a child, never could imagine that I would have my own or that my own story was worthy of a book. And
Mm.
so I did not imagine writing a memoir. I really thought, okay, my authority as a rabbi is to teach Jewish wisdom. And that's what I
Mhm.
set out to do. But a teacher, a great rabbi teacher of mine said, all theology is autobiographical, meaning all the events of our lives, our loves and pains, that is what helps us understand our own faith. And so that's why I decided that I needed to tell some of my own story in order to tell, in some ways, some Jewish wisdom as well. And I hope that people get some of both.
Well, they will. Um, One last I mean, this is a very big question, but this is a very difficult time for everyone, but particularly for people in the Jewish community. Tell us in 1 minute how you are managing to lead a congregation with lots of people who have different views at a difficult time.
Yeah, maybe you've heard the expression 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So just imagine 8,000 Jews. But I would say that what I really value is that I think churches and synagogues and community centers have been places where people could come across lines of real difference and polarization. And when you serve something bigger than yourself, meaning like when we're serving in our soup kitchen or when we pray together or just breaking bread and eating meals together, we see each other in our humanity. And that transcends our ideological differences. So I think having places that are diverse in ideology, these are critical to our democracy, to our sense of community, but maybe most of all to our sense of humanity, that we continue to see each other in our humanity, even when we might vote differently or think differently. So this is the plea, and I actually think that I hope that this book helps further that conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Angela. It's wonderful to talk with you as
Thank
always.
you.
Thank you so much. That was such a great conversation. And also, you should be sure to read the chat because there's a lot of great comments in the chat. So thank you for coming, and
Thank
hope
you.
everyone gets the book. Okay. Now we are moving on to Black Owned, The Revolutionary Life, The Black Bookstore by Char Williams in conversation with Emi Ikkanda. This book is, through the lens of the Black Bookstore, a triumph for Black bookstores and so brilliantly a vision of what bookstores can be. It is an important record with really great, I know it was your method to make sure that it had great storytelling in it, and you super succeeded in that, and history, and a wonderful book to publish in the 5th year of the Tiny Reparations imprint. So that's fantastic. Char Williams is a reporter for, are you guys, you should both come on now. Char Williams is a reporter for NBC News and a former reporter for People. Her writing on race and identity has appeared in the New York Times, the New Republic, and Oprah Daily. And Emi Ikkanda is an executive editor at Tiny Reparations Books at Penguin Random House. And I'm going to turn it over to you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Oh, Char, I'm so excited to be talking about your book. I can't believe we're so close to the pub date. And I just can't wait to dive into it. I just think there's so much that's exciting about this book. And I think that this book is coming at the right moment, it feels, in this age of book bans and the need for like community building. But I think just to start, I would just love to start at the start. How did the idea for this book come together?
Yeah, so I expand more on this in the book, but it all started back in 2018 when I read an article in the Atlantic by Joshua Clark Davis, and it was all about how back in the 1960s, J. Edgar Hoover forced the FBI to basically target and to surveil Black-owned bookstores in the 1960s and the 70s as well. And so I walked away from that story feeling so intrigued and just wanting to know more about how Black booksellers dealt with that repression, right? And so and I am a journalist, and so at my core, I just want to know people's business. So yeah, so I just was very passionate about learning these people's like their stories, and that opened me up to so many more questions, and wanting to like really know more about the history of Black bookstores, and it's been a fascinating and like wild ride ever
It really is.
since then. Yeah.
As you have years of like diving deep into this history and talking to some amazing booksellers, and the history goes really deep. Like it starts with like I think it's the 1830s when like the first Black-owned bookstore opens in New York City, and it's opened by an abolitionist. And so there's like this wonderful history of like activism alongside and liberation alongside just a history of bookstores and I just loved kind of diving into this history. The book kind of ranges like from that first bookstore to like the civil rights era to the 90s boom to today to Black Lives Matter today and just like these beautiful waves of these bookstores kind of coming to life. And I just I know for me, like the stories from like the 1960s and the civil rights era really caught my eye. And like the people that you interview from that era, I just feel like they were so filled with like perseverance and dedication to mission, but also there's also like celebration and like community building. I know it's hard to pick one, but do you have like a favorite story from that 1960s era?
Oh my God.
I know.
So there are so many, but one that stands out to me is I spoke with a woman named Daphne Muse, who was an activist, and she worked for the Drum and Spear bookstore back in the 1960s. And just as a side note, Drum and Spear was based in Washington, DC, and it was basically founded and run by activists, right? Daphne worked there probably in her early 20s, and like she close would close down the shop every night. And when she walked home, there would be a Black car just walking slowly by her, walking home. And that had to have been so scary, like for a young Black woman. And so these FBI agents would follow her. And one day they like were banging on her front door, trying to, I guess, goad her. And she opened her front door that day just to slam it in their faces. And she took so much pride in that small act of pushing back. And like talking about it now, decades later, she had a huge smile on her face. And so I just felt like I felt so much joy to have her share that. Yeah.
Well, you've spent, years doing extensive reporting for this book. And is there any moment that stood out for you that kind of shaped the way that you approached writing the book?
Yes. Of of course. So I talk about this um very briefly in the book, but in the 70s there was a Black owned bookstore called the Hub, Kansas, and it was run by a group of four friends. And they talked about being targeted by the cops. They talked about being friends with the like local gangsters in the town and everything, but they talked about their hardships. But still, all of them said that those years were the best years of their lives. Just basically running a bookstore with their friends. And so, yeah, and so that truly brought home for me the importance of emphasizing joy in these stories, right? So it's not all about hardship and struggle. I've learned, and I truly wanted to make it clear that there was so much joy in running Black-owned bookstores, and that then and now as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great stories about the like epic book parties and these like celebrations and all the ways that all of these wonderful people kind of celebrated their community. We're running up against time, so I'll just ask one last quick question. What do you hope readers will take away from these stories?
Okay, big final question here, but so I write about so many bookstores and booksellers with different like backgrounds and methods, but there is a common theme that they all have a passionate desire to be in co to be in co to be in co co to be in community with the people people around them, and to support people in ways that change their tangible lives, right? So it's just like a through line there, you know?
Oh, it's so lovely, and I think it's so needed now. Thank you so much, Shar.
Yes,
Thank Yes,
yes.
sorry. Were you gonna say something? That's absolutely fine.
No, I was just going to thank you for having me. Yeah.
It was so great to have you, and your book is so necessary, and I think the stories you told from there are wonderful. I also thought it was fantastic that you have the resources in the back of the book with the books that Black booksellers want everyone to read, and also the list of all of the bookstores. It's just fantastic. So thank you so much, and also you should definitely read the chat. There's great stuff in there too. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. Okay.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Now we are going to turn to Family of Spies, a World War II story of espionage, betrayal, and the secret history behind Pearl Harbor by Christine Kuehn in conversation with Ryan Doherty. Christine Kuehn found out that her family history was not what she thought. And as when I was reading it, it struck me, as she says, when you're young, you believe the stories your father tells you. And this book is as advertised. It's a page turner. It's brilliant. It's moving. It's very real. So I'm going to introduce Christine. In 1994, Christine Kuehn, whose career had been in journalism, public relations, and nonprofits, was cocooned in the sanctity of a quiet suburban life when a mysterious letter pierced that bubble, sending her on a 30-year quest to discover the truth behind a horrendous family secret kept hidden for half a century. And Ryan Doherty is the VP and editor-in-chief of Celadon Books.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And hello, Christine.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm really happy to be talking to you about this amazing book. What strikes me is there are so many unbelievable elements in this story that many times I have to just remind myself that this is a true story, that it's not fiction. It is, in my opinion, a really important, never before told story of history. And the book opens with a pretty incredible discovery. Let's start there. Can you tell us about this moment that this story came to you?
Yeah, Ryan, my father never talked about his family growing up. It was really hard to get straightforward answers. He dodged my questions most of the time. And I didn't really understand why he was so secretive. All I really knew about his family was his parents were dead. his sister Ruth lived in New York City, and that he had grown up in Hawaii. And so life tumbles on. It's 1994. I'm a young mother, married with 2 kids, still in diapers, I might add. And I received a letter from a Hollywood screenwriter, and he was asking me all these questions about Pearl Harbor and my family being spies for Japanese, wanted to talk to me and call me. And I was stunned. I was confused. I had no idea what he was talking about. So I called my dad. And he assured me, "Oh, Chris, that's a mistake. They must be looking for someone else. Can't be us." And so I told him, "Okay, well, I'm going to do some research. I'll let you know what I find out. Maybe we're related. Maybe there's something there." And I hang up the phone, and I'm sitting there, and about 10 minutes later, the phone rings, and it's my dad, and he's sobbing. And I hadn't seen him cry since my mom died when I was 18, so it was really heartbreaking. And he told me his whole story, and it was literally the first time that I ever heard my family's history and what had happened.
That's really quite unbelievable. So before we really get into it, what is the family history? What is Family of Spies about?
So, it's interesting. The family is a story. It's my family, and it's a story about how, like many families in Germany, they got caught up in the Nazi movement. It's a story about my family's connection to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and my discovery of this dark secret that was a mystery for most of my lives. I want to give you a little bit of a background of some of the players that are in the book. My grandfather Otto became a high-ranking member of the Nazi Party, and he interviewed to be head of the Gestapo. My uncle Leopold, he joined the Nazi Party as a stormtrooper and ended up working for Joseph Goebbels in the Ministry of Propaganda. Now, my Aunt Ruth, she actually had an affair with Goebbels, and which is, I think, a big part of why my family ended up in Hawaii. But Ruth was half Jewish, and with the Nuremberg laws going into effect, Goebbels had to find a way to hide his misdeed. And so he had the family sent to Hawaii to spy for the Japanese. And my
So,
dad was born in Berlin, and he lived there for 9 years. He moved to Hawaii with his family when he was 9.
so your family arrives in Hawaii, sent there to spy. What was it like? What was their day-to-day life like? What were they doing?
Yeah, well, the entire family went except for Leopold. He stayed in Germany, but they moved to Hawaii in over 6 years. I think it's incredible that they were paid the equivalent of about $1 million today by the Japanese for the work that they did in Hawaii. But the plan when they arrived was to kind of blend in, kind of sleeper spy, like befriend the sailors, get to know the community and build trust and friendships while they quietly gathered intelligence. But if you read the book, you'll realize Otto does nothing quietly. So, it was just really interesting concept. My father, he was blissfully unaware of the spying. But my Aunt Ruth, she ended up probably being their biggest asset. She was young, she was beautiful, and she fraternized with military officers. They wined and they dined her while she subtly extracted tidbits of information about fleet operations. And she went back and forth to Hawaii several times. My grandmother Friedel and Otto used to have lavish parties at their home, inviting naval officers, hoping that they would loosen up and extract additional information from them. Otto would also drive around the island, and he would visit military bases like Hickam Field and Schofield Barracks, right? And he would take photos and he would take notes of the movements of ships. And all this information was being passed along to the Japanese consulate. My dad, one of my favorite stories, I don't know if it's a favorite story, but it's one of the most interesting stories my dad told me about his childhood was he was in the front yard feeding chickens, and a Japanese man walked to the front and asked to speak to Mr. Kuehn. And so, my dad never knew who that man was, and he never knew why he was there. But through my discovery, I was able to uncover that visit happened 1 week before Pearl Harbor. And that man was there to request that Otto create a signaling system that would signal ship movements to submarines off the coast of Hawaii.
That's incredible. And like you said, Otto does nothing quietly. So the FBI was onto them. Tell us a little bit about that and how that plays into the narrative.
Yeah. So in the beginning, the FBI didn't have a full-time office in Hawaii. So their intelligence and information gathering was a little spotty and inconsistent at first. But in 1939, J. Edgar Hoover wrote a memo calling for an investigation into this family that owned two houses, were spending money like crazy, but yet had no viable income. And so on August 23rd of that year, they finally opened a full-time FBI office in Oahu. Ironically, August 23rd is my birthday. So when Angela was talking about signs, it resonated with me because I feel like throughout this process, there have been whispers, when I would get really nervous about telling the story that would say, go ahead, move forward. But that's when the FBI really got rolling and they started collecting data and they created an enormous file on my family at that point.
Which is what helped you in writing the book and researching and writing the book. So Pearl Harbor happens. How did that change things? What happened to the members of your family?
The entire family, except for Hans, who was my dad's younger brother, he was only 9 at the time, were arrested the day after the attack. My grandfather, he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Ruth, Friedel, and Hans, they eventually went back to Germany. They were in the final prisoner exchange during the war. And, my father, he ended up in an internment camp for months. At 15, he was considered just as dangerous to national security as his parents. But he was eventually cleared. He graduated high school in Hawaii. He denounced his German citizenship. He joined the U.S. Army, and he ended up fighting in Okinawa during the war.
So he created a new beginning for your family. I think that's really beautiful.
He absolutely did.
Did learning all of this change the way that you see your father?
Ryan, it really did. Marianne alluded to it. My dad always told far-fetched stories when I was young, and I believed them all. But as I got older, I realized they weren't true. And now, after years of research, I understand why he did it. Telling me all those made-up stories were much easier and less painful than telling me his real ones. He battled dementia for years, and it felt like a race against time because he was starting to lose all his stories. And I knew I wasn't far. It was really close. One day, they would just all be gone. And so it was interesting towards the end when we were really trying to talk and get more history of his past, how difficult it became as he got older. By the end, he didn't remember any of it.
I can only imagine. It's truly an amazing story and a part of history that people need to know. But I can't even begin to imagine how emotional it must have been for you. How did you process all of this?
Well, I've been processing it for about 30 years now. But Ryan, you remember the first time we met, I told you I'm not sure I even want to tell my family story. And honestly, I still struggle with it. It's still really hard. But I met my Aunt Ruth back in 1987. And that was before I knew anything, right? I had no idea anything about the family. But sometimes the words she said to me when I was, berating her to tell me something about my grandparents because I didn't know anything, she looked at me and she said, you have a good life. Don't ruin it with the past. And that hit me. I had no idea what she was talking about. But, to this day, I sometimes hear those words and I consider keeping it a secret, not telling anyone. But then I think about my father and what he endured and how the decision he made not only affected his life, but mine. So it couldn't have been very easy for him. And I know, I'm sorry, it still gets upset no matter how many times I talk about it. I am still so very thankful that he had the courage to walk away from his family and his past and provide myself and my sisters and my mother the family that we were able to enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm not even sure what to say. Thank you so much for sharing your story. All the years of research you did as well it's really clear and it takes a lot of bravery. So thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you all for coming and come next time too. And we'll see you then. Thank you.